Now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Sargis Sangari.
Okay, folks, I know we had a wonderful dinner, so I'm going to try my best to be as monotone as possible and speak for 2 hours. First of all, Shlama Toraya, which is an Assyrian greeting to all the members and extended family and friends of AMVETS, which was formerly also called AMVETS, or American Veterans of World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, also known as Assyrian American Veterans of Post Number 5. To my comrades with the Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW 3579, also some of the members of the Vietnam Veterans of America, specifically VVA 242 members, and also my club brothers of the Legion of St. Michael law enforcement community, and to the members of our law enforcement community, thank you for being here today at this AMVETS function. A special thank you to Thomas Heron, the chief of the Alliance Police Department, and also the members of the Legion of St. Michael. Paul, thank you for being here as my extended family member from my wife's side of the house. Kevin Morrison, previous president of the VFW 3579, thank you for being here. Brian McClure, thank you very much for being here, honoring us, the past president of VVA Chapter 311. And then also our brethren, all the AMVETS, new and past, thank you for being here today. I do want to make sure that we honor one specific guest, which is my honored guest who is here. And my honored guest is, of course, Captain Betty C. Horstman, who is here with her niece today, Susan Andrews. Betty, if you could stand up, please. Betty is the former president of the National Association of Rehabilitation Agencies, the past commander of the Niles Memorial, the past president of the American Physical Association for the Geriatrics Division. From treating Italian POWs in Hawaii to Japan's POW in Saipan and the U.S. servicemen who were injured throughout the entire Pacific, Betty has dedicated 100 plus years of her life serving the nation. I had the pleasure of interviewing Betty. I had the pleasure of interviewing Betty on her 100th birthday on my podcast, New Paradigms with Sargis Sangari. And Betty, I do look forward to celebrating your birthday on 6th December. I don't know if I could put out those Manhattans like you do, but I'll try my best to hang with you. To the commander of the Assyrian AMVETS, Tommy Tamarez, it is an absolute honor for my wife Helen, my daughter Nineveh, who read today's POW MIA Remembrance Ceremony tribute, and my other daughter Atalia, who's here with us today, and also specifically me as a keynote speaker to join the Assyrian American AMVETS at our annual luncheon in remembrance of the 104th anniversary since the end of World War I and 108 years since it began. AMVETS, established initially on December 10, 1944, currently comprises of 250,000 members and growing, and continues to observe Veterans Day in honor of all the past and present veterans. As being one of the largest and the oldest veteran service organizations that is open to and fights for all veterans and their families, Assyrian Americans were the first to establish an AMVET Post in Illinois, and the second group of Americans to set up AMVETS Post in the continental United States, with AMVET Post number 5 being established here in Chicago. Assyrians did lead the way in recognition of our service personnel. So when I was looking at what to speak about today, I went back to a previous talk I had given in 2015, and I thought that given the fact that we're here speaking to the Assyrian AMVETS, it was important to touch upon that speech. Sometimes you pick up stuff, you dust them off, and you see some things are everlasting. So I was asked, why did you join the military? And multiple occasions. And I thought it was important to share that story with future young Assyrian men and women who decide to join the service in support of our nation. So today I want to tell you a story from an Assyrian perspective as to what drives Assyrian Americans to serve the nation wherever they may reside. I'm going to tell you a hard story. It's not an easy story, it's a hard story. It starts with a man wanting to protect his family and country, but it ends with a dead man and possibly a widow being taken into captivity and children even being executed. War is not easy. He's a hero in every sense of the word. He stood tall when others might have run and tried to hide in the shadows. When the enemy approached, he knew what this meant. When the enemy approached, he looked deep inside and figured out what he was made of. And he understood what he had to do. It is an inspirational story to me. It is one which influenced me to enlist in the Army so many years ago. But it is hard, not just because somebody died, but because it calls all of us, I believe, to ask what we should do in response to our enemies. You and I are alike in a few ways. Like most of you here, I'm an Assyrian, Ani Turaya. Like most of you here, all of you here, I am an American. Like a lot of you here, I am a Christian. Whether you're a banker, a lawyer, a mechanic, a preacher, a mother, a father, a son, a daughter, we have these things in common. To our younger folks, you know, when I was young, I was wondering, as a child wonders, what should I do when I grow up? My parents had raised me with a solid foundation, with the love of my nation in my heart, but I didn't really have a way to express that love for my nation or how to channel the desires to express that love in a functional way. I found a calling many, many years ago in what I believe was a miraculous setting. There's a voice in some people's lives which calls out, be a soldier. It is that time when men and women see a need and stand taller. They see that America, and in our case, Assyria, needs their help, and so they raise their hand and say, I am willing. And they are willing, and have been throughout history. In America, these chosen few knew that the redcoats were coming and took up arms. Those soldiers freed our country, the one we live in today. They saw Pearl Harbor attack, and they knew they had to return fire, just as Betty joined the service at that time. These soldiers became our greatest nation, greatest generation. They saw friends drafted and fight in Vietnam and volunteered to serve along other Americans in Southeast Asia. Like most of you here, my cousin Robert, whose dog tags I carried on my first mission in Iraq with my team, They survived all the 7 IED blasts because I knew Robert was with me. A mix of the Vietnam and desert sand together. Vietnam dirt and desert sand. How many saw the Twin Towers fall? And when the smoke cleared, brushed away their fears and met with a recruiter. I've served with many of them. Some of them are buried today in Arlington Cemetery. And every chance I get when I go to Washington, D.C., I go to visit them. They were my friends. They are my friends and comrades. They were willing. We soldiers are willing. We Assyrians are willing. Americans have always been ready because we always respond. We do not shrink from fear, but we walk towards our adversaries. Assyrians have always responded outnumbered and outgunned, as the vanguards of the civilized world has heard in our battle cries in the past and present of Ashur. Today in 2022, we collectively face a different type of enemy. And America and Assyria still need men and women willing to step into difficult theaters of war unafraid and ready to protect freedom for the next generation and to secure our historical lands and heritage and our nation here at home for our children and our grandchildren. Many soldiers enlisted because of major events. They see the TV news and it shows daily injustices. These men and women watching know that they must do something. Or they see a news headline on a quiet morning. It isn't as quiet as they thought. Maybe it was a front page story of terrorism or warfare. It is hard even now, as I am retired and a member of the AMVETS, to see a new article or a news article or a story and not take action. Because I understand. I understand what our soldiers feel today and what I feel as an old soldier. So that's my story I'm going to share with you today. That's the reason I decided to become a soldier in the United States Army. It isn't one that you saw on cable TV or in the New York Times. For those who do not know a little bit of my background, I was born in Iran. I'm an Assyrian by ethnicity who lived through the Iranian Revolution, the taking of the United States Embassy and the U.S. hostages in Iran by the revolutionaries of that time. I remember seeing Eagle 1 rescue mission failures unfold on Iranian TV. I saw it from the other side. For the young Assyrians here today and young men and women who have been born into freedom in the United States, don't ever forget that. You've been born into freedom. My family's life was much like what you may have seen in the movie Argo. If you haven't seen it, watch it. An immigrant at 10 years of age, my story of service to the nation involves another soldier's valiant fight to protect his nation. The Army wasn't my plan. I had no particular plan in life and was asking the question, as I told you earlier, what should I do with my life? A soldier's sacrifice in battle answered the question for me, and the answer came in an unusual way while I was attending a lecture in Chicago 30-plus years ago. An attendee asked the lecturer, a Near East archaeologist who had recently returned from leading excavations of the ancient city-state of Nineveh, for which my daughter is named, my oldest daughter, for the University of Chicago. Sir, I have a question for you. Do ancient Assyrians have any ties to the modern Assyrians? In trying to answer the question, the professor relayed a story of his team's excavations. It was a story that challenged me to becoming who I was. That day, the professor told us of one late afternoon. He said that a unified army of Babylonians, Chaldeans, and Medes approached the city of Nineveh, the capital of Syria at that time. Like the Alamo, the soldiers knew they were outnumbered. The enemy was coming from several directions. The best place to breach the city, of course, was at the main gate. But unbeknown to the rest of the army, the Assyrian army and the nation, a small crack had developed in one of the stone walls of the city. Things looked bleak. Once the enemy breached the crack, the fight would have been over. They could and would kill at will any of your ancestors that they got their hands on. But as their archaeologist team discovered, one Assyrian soldier thought that all was not lost. That one individual spirit, he believed that if his men had enough time, they could escape from the certain death that they were facing. He knew the enemy, despite coming from several directions, could congregate at the crack in that wall and breach the city. Fill that crack, block it somehow, and maybe that would give his men a reprieve they needed. Fill it and defend it with what? They had no hot oil in those times or tar to pour from above. They had no large stones that they could push in the way. He did have a solution, though, but the consequences of that solution were grave. They were grim. On that day, this Assyrian soldier, the tip of the sphere of the civilized societies of those days, positioned himself in the crack of that wall in such a way that he could defend and guard the city. But this meant jamming himself into the wall in such a way that he himself could not escape. He must have known his imminent fate. But instead of resigning to a meaningless death, he decided to fight with valor. At that time, as an expert with spears and swords, this was before, of course, firearms, he fought vigorously as each enemy soldier approached. Soldier after soldier came and was turned away. Assyrian archers were taking them out from the top of the wall as a single soldier fought them below. 35 enemy soldiers were killed at that location without the soldier ever knowing if it had accomplished anything. The soldier was eventually overcome. That's what the professor told us 30 plus years ago. But what I heard was bigger than the story. I realized how we need men and women like that today in our nation, in the United States. The Assyria of that time, the Assyrian Empire fell that day in 612 BC, and the majority of the city was burned to the ground, lost to history for millennia. Following the fall of the Assyrian Empire on that day, the Babylonians rose to power, followed by the Persians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Mongols, the Ottomans, and so and so. A prophet of Israel named Jesus came to be the manifest of God on earth, and Christianity was spread especially by our Assyrian churches throughout the Middle East, from Anatolia to Tibet to Asia, Japan, and other locations that are still being found. Muslims, as you know, believe Muhammad received God's message, and their Arab culture and Islam moved over the landscape of the Near East, where our ancestors lived. Thousands of years later, archaeologists found the body of that one Assyrian soldier, as it had become part of the foundation of the original walls of the city-state of Nineveh, as it had remained in the crack and in the ruins of the city, that beloved city which fell in that mighty battle in 612 BC. Now, only a dozen of us heard this story, this difficult story, as a professor explained, the mortal wounds of the brave Assyrian soldier. I learned that the soldier died of spear and hatchet wounds. His eye socket was cracked, his cheekbone pierced, His ribs were speared and broken. I know, baby. I hear you. A Babylonian sword had smashed his upper forearm. But despite all this, the soldier's own sword was found in his hand against the spine of an enemy body, one of the many bodies which had laid against a crack in that wall, a layer of bodies which had been lost to history and bound together at that moment of death by the clay and the dirt that had mounted over Nineveh until it was rediscovered again thousands of years later after its fall. No one knows the name of the soldier. Anthropologists only knew he died fighting, knowing he would die, still holding the enemies of Syria at bay in the crack of the wall of Nineveh. We know one thing: he died on his feet rather than submitting himself to living on his knees under the banner and flags of his enemies. His final resting place was in the standing position, in the crack of the city-state of Nineveh, with sword in hand laid against an enemy's spine, defending his country and people in life and death. Folks, when I heard that story of the sacrifice of that unnamed soldier, I heard into that deep place, that place in our hearts and souls where honor, courage, duty, and valor come from. I stopped thinking about the meaningless pursuits of life that night. Over 26,000 plus years ago, that unnamed soldier sacrificed himself for a cause, for a mission much bigger than his own life. He led in a way you can't teach a soldier, because that sense of pride, honor, and valor has to come from within you. It has to manifest from within. You have the soul to manifest it. It cannot be trained. That soldier's sacrifice validated who I knew I was. I just needed to hear it 2,600 plus years later. Everything made sense to me that day. I thought about that soldier and how, in dying for his country, for his Assyria, for his United States, and in the service to preserve the beacons of today's civilization, he passed on the traditions and the spirit of that fight and our collective struggle for generations to come over the millennia. Character and integrity and duty. That, like as demonstrated by the Assyrian soldier without a name in the Nineveh city wall, is what makes up every soldier at every rank. His sacrifice inspired at least one Assyrian who served 20 plus years in the United States Army Infantry and Special Operational Forces. 6 years of continuous combat ops. As I mentioned, Robert, the first 7 IEDs were just a token. We all know our duty is not to ourselves, but to our country, which we love so much, which is why we are gathered here today. We have chosen to invest our life for something bigger as an American, for this land we love, the land where my children are being raised, and God hoping that my grandchildren will have a better life. For her people and for the values on which this country and our American Constitution are built. As an Assyrian, for our historical homelands, for our people, our families, and for the values on which our traditions are built. You see, when I joined the Army, I ensured that my life mattered, just like our previous veterans, and even the current ones. I know why I served. In the States, we soldiers are Americans coming from every corner of every town and every state of our country, being called to serve all over the world. As an Assyrian, that call to battle, which has been emblazoned in our hearts through our folk songs and the stories which our grandparents would tell us about our heritage and history, has always guided us towards unity under one flag, but in one nation under one command. I myself may be someone they will not be someone, I should say, that will ever write stories about or become the stuff of legend. But I am here to tell you that your lives do matter. Your veterans' lives matter. The ones who serve, their life matters. That soldier story, yes, is a story from a long time ago. But let's talk about today. You see the news. You saw the horrible decapitations of the Christians that took place from 2014 to 2017, with the newest Assyrian genocide being executed against the root of Christianity in Iraq and Syria. You see daily horrors of the war in Europe and the next pending global war that may originate from Asia. Today it is ISIS-K and Al-Qaeda rebranded, the Taliban, which are still targeting and holding American citizens and some of our partner captives in Afghanistan, which my organization and I and others have worked to get out of Afghanistan as best as we can. A war in the heart of Europe between NATO-supported nations and Russia. A religious theocracy in the Middle East inching closer to acquiring a nuclear bomb as it faces a civil war internal because its young are not happy with their leaders. And an ever-growing menace of a communist party dictatorship in Asia intent on conquering our closest allies and democracies under its dictatorship and ensuring that we are on our knees abiding to what they want globally. So for those who remember, Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden and others are dead, but their values, their hatred of freedom marches on under others' flags and under their current and future desired regions and countries. So that's why I'm here today. Yes, I'm a retired soldier, but I am not done fighting for freedom. You know, you don't need to be in Syria, in Iraq, or in Ukraine to fight. You don't need a gun. You don't need to even wear fatigues. You don't need to be on the front lines in a Syrian enemy plane to be considered a patriot. So what can you do? Do what Captain Betty Horstman was able to do. After her service in the military, my friend Betty, after World War II, used her skills, which she learned in the Army, and began to set up physical therapy programs in the local Chicago area hospitals when there were none in all of Illinois and only a handful across the nation. Her ability to think outside of the box from the Army paid off for our nation. Betty became the PT advisor for the Archdiocese of Chicago. In addition, she trained other nurses to care for elderly nursing home residents during the PT recovery. What you know as physical therapy today originated from that woman, that blessed woman sitting at our table today. You could do what my cousin Robert did, and I know I re-emphasize Robert a lot, but Robert served in Vietnam, suffered the issues that are associated with Agent Orange, and still created First Bank and Trust here. An ambassador to the Assyrian nation, to others. Of course, there's multiple others here. But I do want to recognize that there are organizations like the ones that Betty created and Lincoln Tamraz, more importantly, created when he established AMVETS. making a difference across the globe. For those who established VFW 3579 and VVA 242, for individuals or honored guests that are here, as you met them earlier, to include the Assyrian American Police Association. And George, you're doing a marvelous job at that organization. God bless. To include individuals, you all may not know, but we have table number 3, table number 4 today were donations made in support of our veterans by my good friend Roger Dickens of Dickens Foods and Tony Lazar, who could not be here today. There are many other Assyrian non-for-profits out there that are supporting with the 2023-2024, I hate to tell you, oncoming global famines. So today, what can you do? Support those organizations. There are politicians in global settings involved in ensuring peace is localized. Help them and help them get reelected and get their message out. In this year's midterm election, 196 veterans ran for Congress this cycle, with at least 81 of those veterans winning their respective races as of this past Friday on Veterans Day. The total marks the largest number of veterans who have served in the military and have won office in decades. Folks, when you add those numbers to the current 12 incumbent senators who are veterans and were not up for re-election this year, and taking into account an undecided race in New York that involves 2 former service members, God bless them, going up against each other. They must be Marines. That means at least 94 lawmakers with prior military experience will be part of the 118th Congress starting in January. Through 11 races involving former service members are still out there to be called. The current total tally, more veteran lawmakers are serving Congress starting in 2023 than any other time in 10 years of our history. God knows that those veterans will save our nation regardless of their political affiliation. All the organizations I mentioned above, both private and public, do need support. So think of it as an investment in our future, not just a tax write-off. They need your time, whether it is stuffing envelopes or maybe manning a call center. It all helps. Hold a fundraiser for them as it is being done. The Police Association, I think, has a Christmas gathering on the 9th of December. Attend it. It's your association, folks. Next year, 2023, on November 12th, you will have another gathering here. And I look forward to seeing one of our younger members to be the guest speaker. They need your skills. You might have a special skills that can really help them spread the message. They might need someone to design their websites or write their press releases. In some of our cases, maybe help to figure out how we can work that VCR again. You might have contacts. Use them. I want to thank the members of the AMVETS and everyone else who joined us here today. If I miss anyone, that is my failing as a human being, so forgive me. And I do want to remind you of one thing. There's nothing more beautiful for me than the young kids who are trying to speak to us from their platform. That is our next generation. Everything we do is for them. Keep them in your love. Support them always. Be kind to our nation, both United States and Assyria. And be an example of Christ if you can. As I said, I'm a Christian just like you. I'm an Assyrian just like you. God bless you, God bless Assyria, and God bless the United States of America.